Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud road. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na.
Hey guys, welcome back to Eggs. This week we have a special guest. His name is Dan Englander. Dan is the CEO and founder of Sales Schema. Prior to founding Sales Schema, Dan was the first employee and head of new business at Idea Rocket, as well as the account coordinator at DX Agency. Currently, Dan and his team have executed over 7,000 campaigns and won millions in lifetime revenue with companies such as Birchbox, Stripe, and Venmo. In addition to helping agencies grow, Dan has made a name for himself as the host of the Digital Agency Growth Podcast and the author of Mastering Account Management and the B2B Sales Blueprint. Here to talk about B2B sales and lead generation systems for growing a digital agency, the evolution of ad agencies, and more, please join me in welcoming to the show our guest, Dan Englander.
How are you, Dan?
I'm well. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
Absolutely.
making the time for us. Hey, we usually like to start with kind of like an overview of your work history and how you got started and how you got from A to B. But I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, while doing a little research, that you spent some time in Santa Cruz working for a hip hop radio station.
Yeah, man. It wasn't necessarily hip hop, but I was the hip hop director at the Santa Cruz College radio station, which was KZSC, which was it was like the most classic college radio experience. So if you've ever been there, it's cool to check out, if you're into radio, if you're a nerd. Like, it's basically this cabin in the woods, and there's just like behind you right now, there's just like stacks of vinyl and stuff, and a lot of people, a lot of weirdos spinning different tracks and stuff. So I was the hip hop director for I guess like 1 or 2 years there.
Sounds like my
shows at like 3 a.m. when I started and stuff. So
yeah, it sounds like my kind of place. I would be right at home. That and Santa Cruz. I love Santa Cruz. Boardwalk is amazing.
Yeah, it was a great 4 years. A beautiful campus that I barely remember at this point.
Right. So coming out of college,
Santa Cruz. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh yeah, coming out of college, what did you do first? What was your first kind of foray in the professional world?
Yeah, so I basically, came home for summer in the DC area, just randomly where I am now, just kind of visiting family, and then knew I wanted to be in New York and didn't really know what I wanted to do, and just sort of moved to New York, and worked a couple internships. I worked at a music promotions company that I knew through the college radio station, and did catering, and I like get up at 3 a.m. and go off to Westchester to go work bar mitzvahs and stuff and hold trays and that sort of thing. And then basically like through a connection in one of my old internships, got a job at an ad agency, which is, I've always joked, that's just kind of like where you end up, where the detritus ends up in New York. If you don't know what you want to do and you just kind of keep hustling, eventually you end up in an agency. And I was basically, working as an account coordinator. So I was, dealing with various client service stuff for kind of like larger consumer accounts. And we had a big consumer electronics brand that made a major headphone product, and I would basically pitch stuff that would never get looked at. I would manage Facebook walls and do all sorts of stuff like that. And eventually wanted to move on and landed in a new business role, and it was essentially actually like a split new business account management role for an animation studio called Idea Rocket, and I was pretty much the first hire there. And learned a lot, and didn't really take ownership of being in a sales position, which I think is pretty common for lots of agency people. You're kind of in this like hybrid role where you're running back and forth between, winning new business and serving clients and that sort of thing. So eventually, learned a lot, failed a lot too, got on lots of different sales calls. We did everything under the sun. We're investing in, inbound marketing, outbound, and made it work and, helped them grow from pretty modest start to seven figures and a bunch of Fortune 500 clients. And then from there, just knew I wanted to do my own thing. Didn't really know what it was. Again, I quit that job, did the whole Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week thing and like traveled Asia with my girlfriend at the time and self-published a couple business books, one of which did pretty well in certain circles, called Mastering Account Management, basically based on that role of managing clients while winning new ones, and use that to launch Sales Schema. And early on, we pivoted to the model that we're on now. And if people are in the agency space, they might understand it. If they're kind of outside the business space, kind of in different areas, basically we're like an outsourced sales team. So what we're doing is we're getting, good meetings for our clients, and we specialize on agencies and marketing service companies. And we're doing campaigns over channels like email, LinkedIn, and phone. That's kind of where we're at now. So that's the story in a nutshell. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for the background. And it's funny, because I look at services like what you guys are doing. I mean, I don't know how much you know about our backgrounds, but basically I come from the agency world also. I run a ad agency or design shop. And but what's so interesting is I'm hearing you talking about account management is the different paths people go through, especially when they start agencies. So I noticed on your website that you guys like to work with boutique agencies and things like that. And I know that some of the boutique shops that I know, or many of them, are sort of started by the creative folks, or the quote unquote creative people. The art directors or copywriters or whatever go away with a client, or go in-house someplace and start their own firm later or whatever. And so, but what's so interesting is the difference in training between what an account manager gets or coordinator has versus what a creative person has or what the art side has. And so when these art guys go out, and I'm speaking kind of from my own personal experience, most art guys aren't good with people. And so they go out and they start these agencies, or these, quote unquote agencies, and they have a few clients that they brought with them, maybe a couple people they know or something. But when it comes to actually going out and finding new work, there's some real challenges there. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about it just from the account side, like what kinds of firms do you partner with, and what kind of, like, I guess, what could somebody expect if they were working with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that's absolutely true. And there is this sort of like accidental salesperson, or even sometimes accidental business owner type dynamic. But to answer your question, we basically focus on marketing service companies of all stripes. So that includes, media and branding, communications, design development, lots of things in between, influencer, and kind of multi-service marketing service companies. And typically, what we're doing is we're working with an agency that's gotten from 0 to 1 on referrals and their personal networks, and they get to a place where that's not enough anymore. And they know they either want to do one of three things, and those three things are, grow and take over the world, get massive or something, get acquired. We have some people in that boat that are actively trying to get acquired, and then we have others that simply, want to do compelling work, go home on time, do stuff that kind of gets them and their teams up in the morning. And they get to a place where basically they know they need to get to something that scales. So to answer your question, usually what we're doing is we are building a strategy to kind of go out and do outreach on their behalves to get them good meetings. Because what we find is most of the time, assuming, we're a fit, and we're typically a fit when an agency's been around for, I don't know, at least a few years and has good case studies, they do have really great stories to tell. It's just about kind of knocking on the right doors in the right way, and getting to a place where there's actually support on behalf of the salespeople. Because most agencies are at least relatively good at fulfilling things for their clients. They know they need a division of duties. They know they need different people doing different things. But then when it comes to sales and new business, it ends up becoming this completely sporadic thing that just sort of happens, when the agency has time. Even if they have gotten to the place of having a dedicated new business person, that person is rarely supported. That person's kind of trying to figure out how to do the full stack of the sales process on their own, which is really unlike every other, major B2B enterprise or B2B service company. Just like you would have division of duties with your fulfillment process, you would have division of duties with your sales process. So basically, from a high level, what we're doing is taking over a part of that process, taking over the early stage, kind of top of funnel part of that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then, so do you guys actually help with developing the, I guess, the strategies and the things that you can then hand off to the agency so that they are allowed to scale? Or is it sort of, incumbent on that relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are in part, we are in that we are essentially working in a done for you way to get, good meetings onto the calendar. So we're informing the top of funnel strategy, and specifically as it applies to outreach and doing outreach in the right way, which is something I can definitely get into. From there, when it comes to like scaling, on the new business side, on the top line side, our whole philosophy is that that can only be done by getting the reps in, by actually trying to sell something to people and either having that thing be accepted or rejected with feedback. It's kind of like the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face kind of thing. So we're big believers in that. We don't like the idea of kind of sitting around in a corner trying to develop positioning papers. What we like to do is say, hey, where have you had success? Where are your best clients, your best testimonials? Let's start there. And then if there's other things you want to do and you want to position yourself a different way, do that by testing it. We can do 80% former, 20% the latter. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great.
So you mentioned case studies. Are you doing a case study on your agency that you're potentially going to work for, or are you kind of doing an overall just overview of their previous clients, where their success came from, and how to generate new leads based off of their previous work history?
Yeah.
Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, it's a great question, and we've sort of been optimizing things and rethinking kind of how we do outreach for our clients over the course of the last couple of years. And to give you kind of like the long, and I'm going to answer your question kind of a roundabout way.
Sure.
But what used to work a lot better and still sometimes does work is that direct sales approach, right? Where we're selling a client and we do the outreach is coming from the client. It's not like we're ever in the middle. And we're saying, hey, we're an agency. We focus on XYZ. We have all these amazing case studies. Talk to us, right? And people would say yes a lot of the time. What's happened in the last couple of years, and now with COVID and everything going digital, that's been accelerated massively. Is there's just a lot more agencies out there, and B, just a lot more overall competition for attention. So that direct sales approach is less effective, although there are some exceptions. And there's essentially a premium and a lot more personalization that has to happen to get meetings on the calendar. So when we're doing outreach on behalf of clients these days, what we're moving towards is less of a hey, check out our case studies sort of approach, and more of a hey, I have some personal connections with you. We have these commonalities in this and that way. We have interesting backgrounds. Hey, I used to do college radio and you're a DJ. By the way, I run this agency. We should have a conversation. And that's harder to do, because it requires data, it requires work, it requires a lot of stuff that goes into that, but it works. And that's kind of what we're moving towards. So to answer your question, I've used case studies to mean more like, where does the agency have experience? Where do they feel comfortable closing deals, and where do they understand the intricacies of a particular vertical, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Sure. I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, it's difficult to be, especially as an outsider, sort of the expert in all things, right?
Yeah.
So, but do you come in then, and you mentioned that you provide some top level strategy. I mean, do you have clients that come to you thinking that they're one type of agency, and through your discussions reveal that they're something else entirely? I know that like niching is a real challenge, especially for small agencies. A lot of times, especially in the early years, there's a lot of sort of catch as catch can type of work where you just take whatever you can. And so you end up with, a book that includes 20 different industries or something, and you're not really a master of any of them. But if they were to approach somebody like you, they might say, oh, well, we're really good in, I don't know, fashion, automotive, electrical, healthcare, blah, 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 whatever it is. And, so they might come to you with this, I guess, assumption that they're experts in these spaces, when in reality, maybe they're not. How do you sort of, I guess, navigate that with your clients?
Yeah, great question. And that's one of the biggest issues across the map in the agency space that I've seen. And, 3 weeks ago is a great example of this. We were talking to an agency, and I was like, where do you guys, can you describe your client base? And then they're like, well, I'd say 80 or 90% of our clients are financial institutions. And then I'm on their site and I'm like, this is like 5 industries. Why are you branding your site to all of these industries at the same time? Like, you're leaving so much opportunity on the table. It's literally 80% of your business, 90% is this one type of client. And like, you're not putting your best foot forward here. And that's an extreme example, but I think a lot of agencies have that to a big extent. I'm not trying to beat anybody up over it, but I think that I've sort of broad framed how I think about niching. And I used to say the word niching. Now I say specialization, because I don't think it necessarily has to mean picking one niche. It's more about finding that through line that kind of connects your clients and then making it super clear to people. My buddy Nate compared it to, like, when you're shopping and you want to buy either like, lotion or shampoo, right? And there's all these different labels, and it's like, this is the shampoo that has the aloe, or the lotion that has the aloe, and the shampoo that has this and that and the third. You're like, and it's just selling you, and there's all this cool stuff. Eventually, you have to just figure out whether it's shampoo or whether it's lotion, right? Like, it has to be labeled for the outsider to understand what it is. And agencies don't do that well enough. So it's literally having a site that says, we focus on these 2-3 industries, and we do these 3-5 things. And then you can get into all the superlatives and, the things that make you special and different and so on. So I like to think of it more like specialization and finding that through line. And for example, we've had clients where maybe like they're focusing on, they say they're focusing on legal, and they're focusing on financials, and they're focusing on education. And then they're also like, and we focus on motorsports. I'm like, okay, one of these things is different than the others. So maybe cut out that thing. And the thing is, like, the biggest fear that we hear all the time is like, oh, well, we have 1 or 2 clients in that space and they're going to hate us if we do this. And that almost never happens. That if they're happy with you, they're not going to fire you because your website changed. So it's as simple as having a conversation and say, hey, we're branding ourselves this way. Still, you guys are still our legacy client and very important to us, and so on. So it's almost never a problem.
No, that's actually, it was the next question I had written here was this idea of specialization. I know that especially in smaller agencies, but I imagine even at scale, even at a pretty large agency, sometimes it might be difficult to specialize. And there is that fear, by changing your brand or changing your name or changing your look and feel or whatever, that you're going to shake your existing base or whatever. And so there's always this trepidation. And so I'm glad that you addressed it in that way, just that, it almost never happens, or as bad as you think it's going to get, it almost never is.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, to kind of call it out, like, sure, there's some risk. Maybe you pick a vertical or a few verticals, and then something massive happens and they all get wiped out. Like, I guess, hypothetically, to give the devil his due, like if you niche down to restaurants and January, like that was a really bad move, right? Obviously. But I think there's more risk in not doing it. There's more risk in just trying to be everything to everybody. So
yeah. What do you think of the alternative, I guess? And this is just kind of a hypothetical, just speaking from my own experience. So you mentioned, for example, had you chosen restaurants in January, obviously this year would have been a rough year to be doing restaurant marketing, unless you're pretty darn innovative. And, but in general, like, one of the things I would say that sort of helped our agency weather over the years was that we were kind of diverse. And so when different parts of the, world's ecosystem would sort of shut down, or, real estate would, we'd be really busy in real estate and healthcare and automotive, couple things. And then healthcare took a hit. And so, but, we were good because we had these other guys. And then when healthcare came back, well, housing took a hit. And so now all of a sudden those guys aren't doing any work, So I don't know. I don't know if that's a good argument for some broader scope, or when you talk specialization, I guess maybe there's degrees of how specialized we need to get.
Yeah, it's a good question. And we're probably not going to figure out like the silver bullet template for it. It's something that's going to take testing and time, and everyone's situation is different in terms of like finding that product market fit or product service fit. So, but I will say that there's nothing wrong with that. You have to kind of figure out what mode you're in as an agency, and whether you're in kind of a survival mode at the bottom, like a rebuilding or restructuring mode, or like a growth, take over the world mode. And I think the growth mode, which is something that should always be a focus, because I think none of those are mutually exclusive, is going to require specialization. I think that's not an option, not optional. And then when you look at pretty much every successful company, I'm sure there's exceptions, but it's almost always to a T what they did. Everything about IBM calculators, Facebook was colleges, Amazon was books, not even all books, but certain segments of books. Like it's amazing to see the homepage from like 1993 or whatever it was. So, but it's a good point. And I'll say that if you are in that survival mode, then it might be about networking and hustling within those successful clients that might not fit where you've decided to brand yourself, and in taking that business, or if it's coming to you, and that's fine as well. It's more about how you're putting yourself out there publicly, and so on. Yeah.
So you get a new client, new agency you're working with, and you figure out what demographic you're going for and who you want to approach. What's like your best platform right now? Is it email? Is it LinkedIn? Is it a combination of all of the above? I just got an email from a guy that wanted to help us promote our podcast, and it started with "Fine Sir," and when it starts with that, I pretty much just send it to the trash. Is there a better way?
Because you aren't a fine sir?
Yeah,
you're
kind of funny. I like that.
Right. So it's I mean, there's got to be a better way to approach a cold email or a cold message on LinkedIn or this or that. Can you kind of break that down?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of channel, I don't like to get super hung up on the channel, for LinkedIn versus everyone's like, oh, what's working better? They all have their pros and cons. They all have, idiosyncrasies. I think the better way to think about it is like, what do you need to do to de-risk a business conversation? And too many people are thinking of it as in, what do I need to do to convince them to do business with me, or to convince them I have a USP, or unique selling proposition, or any of these other things. Like, all you're trying to do is de-risk that conversation. So I think once you do it like that, there's all sorts of different things you can do to make that happen. And it's really about simplifying the process. So instead of trying to build some crazy funnel out the bat, why not think about, okay, let me find 100 people that are like my successful clients and build a list around them. And then it's more about like, what do I need to say to them to actually get them to have a conversation with me? So it's like, okay, they need to know that it's not going to be a high risk thing. If I can find people that I have a personal connection to, that's even better. So maybe it means you're starting with people that are in the right companies, but also went to the same college as you, or are part of the same trade association, or maybe they used to work for a client that you have now and they've moved on to a new company. Those are all like really good ways in, and people will take that call. And also just the way, like the phrasing, the artistry. I don't think there's one way to do it. I think you can't template it, but you want to kind of think about what everyone else is not doing. What's going to actually stand out in an inbox. Like literally click into your spam folder and just like after you've drafted your email and just make sure it's different. It's like one thing is having a subject line that actually describes what's in the email, as opposed to like something weird or something that nobody ever says. Like just make it accurate and genuine. And in terms of the tone, there's different ways to do this. You can have a long message that works. You can have a short message that works, but writing it as if you're, somebody that's an acquaintance that they might have met at a cocktail party or business networking event works a lot better than writing the email as if it's a newsletter. Like it's a completely different tone. That's the biggest thing is like when we try to scale and we hire copywriters and strategists for our business, it's really hard to find the sort of people that can do this well. Because everyone's writing as if it's like something that they've opted in for and it's like marketing copy. It's really not the same thing. So I think my best advice is don't be afraid to break the rules. Don't be afraid to like have fun with it and do something a little more creative and different, because it'll probably work better than all the pre-canned emails and all the stuff that's out there. Yeah.
So do you use any platform to figure out your engagement? So if you have that email that you send out, is it like MailChimp or someplace like that where you can actually see, did they click on it? Did they click on the link? How far they got through the process? Do you have a preferred method for that?
Yeah, so there's lots of different softwares, and where it's not that I'm being coy. I don't want to recommend one, but we're always just bouncing around
Sure.
and trying different things for different projects and optimizing. But generally, to get technical and get into the weeds, you probably want to use a different platform for outreach to cold people than you would like with a MailChimp.
Sure.
That's for a lot of different reasons, just the way it's set up and that sort of thing. And there's one called Airborne app, which is really good, and that's more for teams. There's another called Reply.io. There's one called Limlist. There's a whole bunch of them. So, but to answer your question, I think again, if you start from the starting place of like de-risking a conversation, there's a lot of different ways to do that. So a lot of these platforms will tell you, if somebody's opened, if somebody's forwarded it or whatever, and then you can prioritize those people for more outreach. And that's where you might want to pick up the phone and say, hey, and just wanted to reach out, like put a face to a name, et cetera, et cetera. And we have done successful campaigns like that in the past. What we're finding to work now, and where we're getting tons of appointments for our clients, like we have one client that's getting literally 20 appointments a week with VPs and above in major companies. We've gotten responses from CEOs of Fortune 500 companies at this point. Using this approach is we're not even needing to do that. We're just basically figuring out where our clients have a personal commonality already, referencing that, and that's working a lot better. And I think that's where things are heading. I think that whatever you do, it's going to require more personalization than just playing this numbers game. Like, yes, it is a numbers game. The numbers do matter, but don't be afraid to build a campaign that's like 50 people that you're going after and give that a shot. Would be how I would approach it, kind of starting from zero.
Yeah. And so maybe that's a good segue into this idea, which is I wanted to ask you, how do we find the right balance between automation and a customized approach? I think for a lot of people, the instant thought that comes to our mind is email automation or whatever. I can reach the most people in the least amount of time. I can do something quickly. And you sort of touched on this here at the end, the idea of customization, where maybe you're doing something for a much smaller group of people. But how do we, I guess, identify or decide when we should do that? You mentioned, maybe people who are engaging with your email is one idea, but, are there other ways that we should know or make a determination on whether we should be even employing these, automated services at all? Because maybe that's not, our brand, for example.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that automation often gets touted out because everybody wants it, when it can have diminishing returns depending on your market and the stage of the sales process somebody is in. So, a lot of the times there's people that are selling inexpensive tech products or selling kind of like inexpensive agency services, but to a mass market of people like chiropractors or plumbers that can employ a whole different level of automation than you would want to if you're selling to 5, 6, 7-figure services to, a mid to large company. It's just a different ball game. So I think for the latter, which is entirely our clients and what we're focusing on, there's different ways to think about automation. And from a high level, I think it's more about when you don't have any sort of relationship with somebody, and I'm defining relationship really loosely, as in they haven't responded to you, you have had no digital or phone or whatever conversation, then that's the top tier, and that's probably the most automated. Once somebody replies, then they're essentially leaving that tier and going into a place where there's a human that can look at the reply and respond to it, the right way. Beyond that is when you've actually had a conversation, over Zoom or in person eventually or whatever. And at that point, there's not much automation that you want to employ. You might have a template. You might say, okay, here's 30 prospects I talked to 3 months ago. I want to contact them today. So I'm going to have like an overall template, but then I'm going to kind of edit each one. I might have an opening line and say, how's the weather in Salt Lake City? Or, how's this other thing? Like we talked about X. Because that's going to get you way, way better returns, and it's going to be worth it compared to trying to over automate that process. The other thing is, and this, I think, to back up a little bit, I think instead of thinking of processes and tactics, it's better to start with who's doing what, So if it's just you, if you're like a solo or a very small team, you might have to divide up your time and do everything. And that's just part of it. But you want to plan as if you're going to be building that sales team. So eventually you might have a situation where somebody's teeing up that first meeting, and essentially doing outreach to people that don't know you yet. And then once a conversation has been had, it's in a CRM, and that's now the domain of the closer, who might be an owner or somebody you hire. And from their domain, it's probably minimal automation. They might find shortcuts and ways to kind of batch things up, but they're not like doing these sort of autopilot campaigns. They're putting some curation to it. So I think that's a much better way to think about kind of like quote unquote big ticket, agency sales. Sure.
And this is maybe one step ahead of that even, we've been talking automation, but what do you do? Like if an agency comes to you, for example, maybe they're small, maybe they're not, but they come to you and basically they don't have a list. They don't have anything, and they sort of are asking you to now generate some leads for them or whatever. But I mean, what sort of tactics are you employing to do lead generation in the first place if you're not provided a list? And then how do you help them manage and keep up their sales pipeline, or even create one in the first place for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd say probably 90% of the time, maybe 80% rather, that's the situation we're up against. Is the agency kind of knows, where they can play ball. They're like, we have really good case studies in this place, this other industry, but it's rare that we get a list. Usually, we're turnkey, so we're doing all that anyway. They have a list, great. If not, we're all, we're even if they do, we're having to expand it and enrich it and do all sorts of stuff to it. So that's usually the common situation. And if somebody has no idea who they're going after, we might not be a fit. But as long as they have, a track record, we can build lists around it, and then it becomes us kind of refining the strategy and saying, okay, you guys have done the most business here. This is probably who we should go after. If you want to experiment with something else, we'll put it on top, but we should focus on this one area. And then from there, we're not sales coaches per se. We know sales coaches and make those sorts of intros when we need to, but we are kind of informally governing, not governing, interacting with their strategy and their sales approach, because we're really hands on with how the meetings are going, what's happening and what's not. And then once we start getting tons of meetings, that's where it tends to expose cracks in the wall, in terms of follow-up process, in terms of where the value of the agency lives, in terms of making it easy for people to get started. So we do encounter that. We're just not the main people dealing with it. And when they need extra help, we make the right intros.
Okay. So maybe that's a bit of clarity that I had missed. So you guys don't actually go to the meetings then. Basically, you just facilitate them, schedule them, and then a representative of the agency or whatever would go.
Correct. Yeah. And then we get feedback on the meetings as they're happening. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. A good way to think about us. And I think that even if people never hire us, we're looking to fill a junior to mid-level sales position in an agency in a way that's better, faster, cheaper. Because I think a lot of what we see is that agencies try to hire that role, and then they hit a snag because it requires a few different skill sets. It requires part art, part science, part hustle, and then also just all the raw materials, the data, the software, getting it wrong and for so long. So like a lot of our clients' value props, it's pretty similar. We just think it's better done through a fractional team.
Sure.
Like that. You mentioned CRM. Do you have a preferred platform that you like over the others?
Yeah, good question. I tend to be pretty agnostic about software. Just
I tried to get one out of you earlier.
Yeah, but I will. No, but I also love nerding out on this stuff, so I'm happy to get into it. Ours is so. I personally use Streak because we're on the G Suite, and there's pros and cons with everything. I like Streak because it lives in the email inbox. So where a lot of mess tends to happen, I've found personally, is just like moving data between different platforms. So if you have it within the same platform, I've gotten used to it. So that's my personal preference. Our clients are all.
Sorry to cut in. Is that a plugin that works with like Gmail in the?
Yeah, it's essentially a fancy Gmail plugin that's paid.
Okay.
There's all sorts of good stuff though. I think that I've heard great things about Pipedrive, great things about Close.io. What I don't want to beat these companies up because I think they do really good stuff, and I think if you have a more robust marketing infrastructure, it can work really well. I think we see a lot of agencies jumping in with heavy duty marketing automation platforms too early, like HubSpot and SharpSpring, and Salesforce just does way too much for most small agencies. It's like getting an 18-wheeler to move your bedroom apartment. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think it's better to start small and then upgrade to that, when you need to. Yeah.
Like that. So recently you published an article on your website, and you were talking about using virtual assistants for lead generation. And I thought that was an interesting approach. I would never thought to hire a virtual assistant for something like that. Can you kind of break that down and talk about the pros and cons of actually doing that? I wouldn't necessarily want someone, in England trying to sell my landscaping company in Idaho. So sure. How does that work? You just create processes for them and they do all the cold calls?
Yeah. So basically what I would say is I wouldn't necessarily use VAs for cold calling for like a high-end agency service. And that's, you pulled an article from the archives, man. That probably needs an update.
It popped right up. It was one of the first ones on there. Yeah.
Yeah. I probably need, that's a good point. If people are going there, it's a shame on me for not having it modernized. But I wouldn't say anything there is inaccurate. It's just, I wouldn't necessarily use VAs for cold calling. I think the place they still serve a really useful role, and I think it's probably more about data enrichment. So
Sure.
where that fits into everything else I've been talking about is like, let's say, you're starting small, you're not getting too crazy. You have a list of those 50 Glengarry leads, the people you want to go after. And then you find, one personal commonality you might want to include in a mail merge or something. You could have a VA basically go in and say, hey, go to these websites, find this thing that I can reference in the email about all of these people that shows that I've done my homework. So I think that's a really good use. You could also have VAs do things like, set up an appointment when people are opening things. But no, I wouldn't have I don't think cold calling is super effective for small batch outreach to larger companies. And that's, if anything, I hate it when people say it doesn't work. Like, oh, XYZ is over. Somebody's making it work. Even for what I'm talking about right now, even for exactly what I'm talking about, I know somebody's making it work. I think that it has diminishing returns and it's harder to make work when you're going after large organizations, especially now with everybody distributed. Just the data management's really hard because you're not going to be able to like call in and get through. So you're going to have to find cell phones. What happens when you get a call, right? The number you don't know, you don't pick it up.
I actually, I go one step further. I don't pick it up, and my voicemail actually has the da-da-da-da, you've reached a number that's been disconnected, because I've heard.
Yeah.
This is just rumor that if the robots hear that or whatever, they put you on the don't call back list. So I actually don't even do any business through the phone anymore.
Right. I mean, I think that there's places it probably works, but it's not a good use for your limited time and resources. I think if you're talking about selling big ticket agency services, which is what my specialization is.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit. So, I mean, if you've got, I don't know, a small agency could be pretty small, but maybe somebody small to mid-size. Everybody wants a Nike. Everybody wants a Uber. Everybody wants somebody like that in their portfolio. But like, there's got to be a lot of middle ground, right? So, like, how do you help a client, or a prospective client, sort of identify who it is they ought to be shooting for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to kind of answer that in a roundabout way and shamelessly plug our podcast, because we interview a lot of brand side marketing leaders. We've had CMOs and VPs of marketing. We had marketing leaders from Nestle Waters and from Polaris on recently, and both of them said the same thing, which is they're managing literally dozens of agencies. Holly Spaeth from Polaris mentioned managing 50 throughout the whole organization, and it's a relatively big organization. It's not that big, It's not a Nike. They're probably managing hundreds of, who knows how many agencies. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Everyone's on a different model. But anyway, what the answer is, the idea of just like, oh, I want a Nike, so we're going to go after the Nike for this thing, may or may not be a good way to do it. It's again back to the specialization thing and thinking about more about like, where can you actually be useful? Who can you be useful to? And this isn't something we invented. I think Peter Drucker, who's like one of the greatest age-old marketing thinkers, thinks more from that frame. If you read a lot of his old stuff, it's all about like, where can you fit into a market and be useful, as opposed to what's the cool work that you want to do? What's the fun stuff that gets you up in the morning? It's like, I don't know. I know that it's kind of an unpopular opinion, but I don't know if that's a good way to think about things. I think you more want to think about usefulness, and then you're going to have happy clients. Then you can sell them things that are going to be further useful to them, and then you have people that stick with you for a long time, and then you're going to have a business that's successful, and you'll probably be pretty happy with that, as opposed to, oh, I just want a different thing every day. If you really want a different thing every day, cool, but just come to terms with having some chaos in your agency and having lots of ups and downs. I think that's kind of the trade-off.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at or trying to understand is that, well, and maybe this is a separate question altogether, do you do any sort of, I guess, evaluative work to decide, right? So say, for example, an agency comes to you, they happen to have some experience in apparel, maybe they worked for some store brand, or they've done a couple little things here and there. But then they start coming saying, hey, we want to swing for the fences. We're looking for a Nike, when really, maybe they're just not much better than, I don't know, FUBU.
Fubu's pretty good, man.
I don't know about this.
Isn't he on the Shark Tank?
What's going on with these days?
I don't know. I used to love my Fubu stuff, but yeah, I don't know. It feels like one of those brands that I left back in the 90s for me. Maybe I'm just not paying attention. But maybe pick somebody less, than the Shark Tank guy. but somebody, some other middle brand, store brand or something like this that, nonetheless could be a profitable business, could for sure support your company, but it's still not maybe, the C-suite of athletic apparel. Maybe you're not doing Nike or Reebok, but you're doing, I don't know, Kangaroos.
Yeah. So we are, and I think we're doing it in a better way than many people that are just sort of speculating on what's going to be good for positioning and saying like, and I'm friends with a lot of those people. They do great work, but they would say the same thing, which is like, hey, you actually need to test out what we're recommending right now. So informally we are, which is basically figuring out, okay, where have you been successful previously? And let's start there. And, if that place is not if you really feel bearish and you really have nothing to do with that market, then we both need to be on the same page that we're testing something new, and we can help you do that in a better, faster, cheaper way. But I think that in terms of how to do that, like how agencies should position themselves, back to those interviews we've done recently with CMOs, they basically say, I need to be able to put the agency in a box. I need to be able to understand what they do in one sentence and the problem that they solve. If they're saying, oh, we're really cool, we're really creative, we're really strategic, that does nothing. It does nothing for me, and that's something that people do get to experience, but they don't get to enjoy it until after they've already worked with you, probably for a long time. So, there are intangibles. The problem is people don't get to experience them until after the fact. They're kind of they're lag effects. So yeah. I think that it's about having the courage to jump into a box a little bit, maybe not perfectly, maybe not completely, but, or else just kind of come to terms with the ups and downs.
Yeah. Well, and I was just even thinking about it maybe from like your perspective. I mean, I suspect if you're sort of, outsourced sales, theoretically anyway, your performance is sort of being judged by, number of conversions or number of meetings or whatever it is. And so it seems like if somebody's maybe shooting for the moon, but they're really like, better suited for shooting across town, that it would make sense from your side to maybe sort of coach them in that direction.
Yeah. I'm sorry for missing the question. So that's what I'd say, and that's part of it, is we kind of want to figure out, okay, what's the smallest company that you'd be happy to take on, and then from there, of course, most agencies would love a Nike.
And do you guys target like a brand specific like that, or like say for example they come to you, they say we're in apparel? And so do you just kind of shotgun apparel shops, look for places where there are connections, like you mentioned, where maybe there's a, some sort of personal connection to a brand or something like that, but you're doing sort of educated guesses, but within an industry? Or do you actually, we want Nike, get us Nike?
A little bit of both. If somebody wants Nike and we feel like they can win Nike, if they have the bona fides, we can go after Nike. The way in is going to be indirect, because if we go beating on the CMO's door and saying, hey, we're an awesome agency, talk to us, he or she's not going to take that call. It's going to be more about finding a way in, again, through personal commonality and being able to deal with that. But in terms of what we're finding to work more now, it's never a shotgun approach. It's going to be more about leading again with that personal connection of some sort. And essentially it's not unlike what most of our clients have done to be successful for sometimes decades at a time. In some cases, it's based on relationships. It's essentially just figuring out how to do that at scale in a way that's completely digital. And that's essentially where we've shifted our strategy over the last couple of years.
Like that. One of the questions on your bio that they sent us is actually about scaling an effective sales team, even if you're kind of a small operation. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just like if you wanted to kind of hire a sales guy or someone like you, what's a good approach for an agency that's up and coming and thinks they need to kind of stop relying on referrals and actually do some outsourcing? Yeah,
great question. So it's hard to say the perfect model. I've seen variations on models work. So I think it depends on different things. It depends on your market, depends on your service. So don't worry, I'm going to put some meat on the bone. I'm not just going to leave it quick. But I will say what I've found to rarely work, or what usually doesn't work, is hiring the veteran, right? So you get an owner and they're like, okay, we've done well enough. I'm tired of sales calls, tired of selling. I'm going to get somebody to sit in the sales seat. So then they go find a veteran. They're like, oh, cool. He or she sold to my market. They have agency experience. And we plug them into this role. and everything's going to be great. The problem is that veteran is often used to an existing infrastructure. They're used to an existing machine, and it's a little bit like hiring a driver when you don't have a car for them. So what happens is they send that veteran off into the cold with a portfolio on their hand, and they work the Rolodex for 3, 6, 9 months, and then the agency says, "Oh man, this person sucks. It's been so long. They closed one little thing. This doesn't work. I have to be the one that sells." And the right way to think about it is, let's build the car first and then plug the driver into it. And the only way to build the car is having the person that understands the value prop, that's the best closer already, which is usually the owner, start in that role and get basically a force under them that's getting appointments and getting leads for them to work. We're part of that. I think we do that really well. I think we're maybe the best option under the sun for it, for doing outreach. But even if people never hire us, it could be hiring a junior level person to go learn how to do this and to do outreach. It could be investing in inbound. There's all sorts of things that work. But I think whatever you pick, the right move is sitting in the closer seat for longer than you want to in order to build that machine, basically.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Hey, so let's talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of advertising or the ad agency business. You mentioned earlier, now despite COVID, you mentioned there are actually maybe more agencies than ever. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just how you're seeing the industry evolve from sort of the good old Mad Men days, I guess, quote unquote, good old, to the new modern, highly caffeinated versions, to the hopefully next step, slightly better to their people versions.
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess those Mad Men days probably weren't that good for lots of people, but anyway. And
I know that I honestly couldn't watch the whole series because they were smoking so much that I felt dirty, like just watching it. Like, I mean, I'm fine. People have a smoke, whatever. But I felt every time I was watching the show, I was sitting in a bar and I was just like, I can't do this. So eventually I just tuned out of the show.
Well, it's funny. It's kind of a slight digression, but I can never watch The Office for that reason, because I was like, I just don't want to be in an office this long. It's just, you're literally
by season 9, you got to get out of there, man.
Yeah, exactly. But my girlfriend loves it, and she beats me up over.
My kids love it. It's on 24/7 around here.
Yeah, it's a great show. But anyway, so my understanding, my like take on the way the agency world has changed is, again, the classic Mad Men model, which is just kind of a good way to understand it, was a situation where you would have this kind of like agency of record that would work with a brand for sometimes literally a generation at a time, and there might be like one account person just dedicated to it, and the need to constantly hunt net new business was just less, because you would have accounts stick with you for so long. And I think that was a possibility because the mediums of communication were really limited, right? You had like television, radio, newspapers, etc. So there didn't need to be that many players because there was such limited bandwidth. And of course, the internet changed things, and that's no secret. There's a lot of other things you can do. There's all sorts of different ways you can market. It's cheaper, it's more accessible to way more businesses, and so on and so forth. And basically, brands now, from in my experience, are getting way more value from the optionality, right? From being able to either bounce between agencies or manage a whole bunch of different agencies, try different things, try a strategy X, axe strategy X, move to strategy Y, and so on and so forth. But many, if not most agencies, are behaving as if there's this cargo cult, kind of like according to the old rules, right? As if they're going to like have an account and win it and keep it forever, which just really isn't the case anymore. So I do think that net new business is a bigger priority, because even if you do everything perfectly and you have amazing client service and your clients win, guess what? That CMO may bounce to a new company, because people just across the board are just moving jobs a lot more. There's just across the whole map, there's just a lot more volatility. So I think agencies need to lean into that and focus on net new business and prioritize it like they are everything else. So that's the first thing. I could go on and on. I think the other thing that's happening is everybody's becoming an outsider to an extent, where we're literally, in our homes, we're not necessarily in an office. After COVID, maybe some companies will bounce back. A lot won't. A lot are going to stay removed. So I think a lot of sacred cows are going to get killed. I think the idea of brands saying, I can never outsource this thing, that's going to go away to a large extent. I think a lot more needs will be handled through fractional teams. And also, you're probably seeing this with your agency. The way that you can internally manage processes, I think, is going to happen more through combinations of freelancers and strategic partners, and not necessarily this idea of, oh, we all need to be W-2s, paddling in the same direction. Yes, that dynamic matters, and that can have huge benefits. But I think there's going to be a lot more flexibility to the agency model.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I made a note here when you mentioned AOR, or agency of record. It seems like too, especially as you're looking for new work and, perhaps they're engaged with a team like yours, in terms of landing deals, I feel like there are just fewer and fewer and fewer AOR type opportunities out there too. So if you're really only shooting for that agency of record kind of relationship with your client, you're really limiting the number of companies you can work with. Really, you're talking like maybe a few Fortune 500s. And most of those, even including some of the ones we work with, have an AOR, but then have 12 other agencies that you work with. So it seems like, the shift in the economics of ad agencies actually might favor smaller agencies that are more used to sort of, a gig style economy, or maybe, limited relationships with clients, or maybe long-term relationship with clients, but just not the exclusivity that comes with the agency of record type relationship.
Yeah, that's absolutely what we're seeing across the board, with a few exceptions. That's what these brands are kind of looking for, is that agility and so on. So definitely agree. Yeah.
Well, Dan, we're almost at that time. We like to keep it right around an hour. Can you tell people where they can find you and what's a good way to reach out and a preferred method to reach out?
Yeah, for sure. So salesschema.com, sales is in sales, schema is in schematic. Salesschema.com is our site. Just Dan, D-A-N, at salesschema.com is a great place to reach me. And also, if people are interested, especially in the agency space, we have a podcast called the Digital Agency Growth Podcast that we're putting out pretty much every week.
Nice.
So we'd love to hear from anybody that's interested in nerding out on this stuff even more. So
perfect. Well, thanks so much, Dan. That was awesome. I think there was some really good information in there, and some useful things that folks can act on. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, great questions. I had a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in this week and every week, and we'll see everybody next time.